Thank you. Well, it's a great honour and privilege to have this moment to share our film in this beautiful garden of Bishop Palace, Fulham Palace. And it's just interesting that our collaboration occurred because of the Garden Museum in Lambeth, nearby Lambeth Palace. So the gardens are a kind of inspiration for looking at the broader picture of our history. And at the Garden Museum, they hold a literary festival every year in a different garden. And in 2024, it was at Sezincote, which is in the Cotswolds. And that is going to be part of this evening's talk, how Sezincote compares with here, Fulham Palace. And with its beautiful historic Indian origins, if you like, because it was built by an East India trader who clearly loved India. And I was invited to speak there. So I was going to share my story of 40 years in the Indian cultural world, which stems partly from architecture, a bit of a family connection with Worcestershire sauce, and my own love of the violin, and therefore learning about the Indian violin. So that's a whole topic for another evening. For tonight, it is about how Stella, my colleague, came on board with this talk and said, let me make you a film which is properly Indian to give authenticity, because that is the thing about Sezincote. It's an imagined India. And also what the film has a kind of imagined India theme through it. And it's written by an Urdu poet in the 1850s. So I think the theme of the film, of Sezincote, of Fulham Palace, and indeed even of Worcestershire sauce, and the Indian violin, is they all occurred in the 19th century. And so we have this greater understanding of a sharing of cultures and how the actual human understanding can be more greatly understood through the arts, through the sharing of our cultures. And so without more ado, let Stella explain a little bit about the films that you're going to be seeing. Thank you, Stella.
Thank you, Candy. So my name is Stella. I trained in India in a dance school, and it's a conservatoire. And the school was started Rukmani Devi was married to an English gentleman, George Arundale, and they set up this amazing place in Chennai many years ago called Kalakshetra. So we grew up with this whole idea of very much a syncretic nature of living life. So you embody and imbibe. She was a theosophist, so we grew up with the theosophy principles and value. So now coming back to the film, when we went to see Sezincote, it didn't feel right just to do an Indian dance or an Indian music there, because what you then lose is the location and the history and various connections. So basically what I framed it as heritage as performance. So as a person of today's generation, when you go and see some things which has a very much a bloody past, connection to a bloody past, how do you connect it and how do you make it as a positive experience for everybody? So then I chose this play, which is called the Indar Sabha. It's a very well-known play written by, as Candy said, an Urdu poet. And this play was written in the north, and then it traveled all the way to south. So the southern India, I train as a South Indian art form. So I had to find the connection for the play within the south. And we realized that the play traveled from the north to the south, and then it was supported by the Maharaja of Arcot within the southern India, which was again connected with the East India Company. And then again, this play was performed for the East India merchants and traders. And also the book, the first translation and the books are all there in the British Library. So the various threads were connected. So therefore, we thought it would be just appropriate to use the play as a conduit between India, England, Cotswold, and the fairies to present you, to bring this kind of an experience. The second film is very short, which we haven't written anything. My apologies. It's on Krishna, and it's very, very short. What it does is, Krishna is the only god. Krishna is the only god who makes connection at all levels. He's a philosopher, he's a small child, and especially when we went to see Tavanna's Krishna, it is very, very symbolic and everybody knows who Krishna is. So you will see these little community children, and I did the filming at my local ground, and it's about nature, it's about color, it's about embodying it, and I have used what is called Notu Swaram, which is what the South Indian musicians used to use, the notes, like the God Save the Queen, God Save the King, that da-da-da-da, you'll hear it when you listen to the music.
It's folk, you'll recognise that sort of Irish folk songs in this.
Yeah, so it's always the connection. So you don't do it as without the relationship. You're always looking at India, England, India, England, India, in England. And we do share some amazing good as well as negative experiences. So why not highlight all the positive? I just pass it on to Lucy. Thank you.
Hi there, I am... Great. I am Lucy Hart. I am the head gardener here at Fulham Palace, and I'm going to take you on a tour a bit later of the garden. So it's a beautiful evening, it's not too hot, which is lovely. We're going to focus our tour on the Bishop Compton collection. Bishop Compton was passionate about collecting plants. He was the Bishop of London here between 1675 and 1713. And he imported plants mainly from Virginia, but all over the world, including India, Peru, the Canary Islands. And so we're going to walk around, we're going to look at some of the specimens that we've got here on site, and we're going to talk a bit about what happened. And then, if time, we'll walk through the wall garden as well, and we can just enjoy the wall garden in the evening. And then we'll come back here.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Thank you all for coming. So my name's Alexis Haslam, and I am the community archaeologist at Fulham Palace. And so I'm going to be giving a quick talk. I just lost it again. A quick talk just now on the links really between Sezincote and Fulham Palace, essentially. So first slide, please, Kate. So really, when we talk about Fulham Palace and links between Fulham Palace and India, we need to go back to William Howley, who was Bishop of London. Fulham Palace is the home, or was the home to the Bishop of London until 1973. And Howley married a woman named Mary Frances Belli at the Church of St George, Hanover Square on the 29th of August, 1805. At the time, Howley was just a canon of Christ Church in Oxford. So that's the church that they got married at. Kate, next one. So going back in time, Howley is born in 1766 in Ropley, which is Hampshire. He's the son of Reverend William Howley and Mary Gauntlet, who was the daughter of a wine merchant. So he's educated at Winchester College and then at New College, Oxford. In 1792, he becomes chaplain to the first Marquis of Abercorn, and he succeeded his father as Reverend at Ropley in 1796, and 1802 he's appointed to Andover. Next slide, Kate. So he's gone quite a fast trajectory career path here. By 1811, he's got the rectory of Bradford Peveril in Dorset. 1813, on the 5th of October, he's admitted to the Privy Council, which is the body of advisors to the monarch. And 5 days later, he's made a Bishop of London. So that is a very quick, very, very quick trajectory there. So he must have known some people. Yeah. Next slide, please, Kate. But the main thing that we have to look at with Bishop William Howley, and when we look at Fulham Palace, is the fact that he made a lot of changes here. So he arrives here, he begins to make changes to the palace building itself. This is actually a plan that's in the hall just outside, and if you actually go out there at some point, you can look at the changes that he made. These are the changes that he made. And there's a report in Gentleman's Magazine, November 1814, that says, "The Bishop of London is making very considerable alterations and other improvements to Fulham Palace, the expenditure of which will probably amount to £20,000. That's about over £2 million in today's money. That's a lot of money for a bishop to be spending on a palace which actually was only renovated in 1764. So questionable as to where the money's coming from. Next slide. So where is it coming from? He's not a wealthy or from a wealthy background. As canon of Christ Church between 1810 and 1811, his wages actually fluctuated. So he's not paid a regular monthly salary, and it could vary. So lowest month he just got £5, usually between £100 and £200 a month. And on one occasion he actually received £500, but we're certainly not looking at somebody who's got £20,000 to spend on a bishop's palace. So we start to look at his wife here, Mary Frances Belli, who has a very, very interesting background. And Mary Frances Belli was actually born in Calcutta in 1782, and she's the daughter of John Belli and Elizabeth Stuart Cockerell. Yes. Yeah, this is where we're going. So we know that this is a really, really interesting family story. So we know her father, John Belli, was born in 1740, but his origins are really quite difficult to decipher. So the interesting thing about John Belli is he's christened at the Portuguese embassy on the 24th of October 1740. His father was a man named Nicholas Belli, and his mother was a woman named Gracia or Grace de Bivar de Veiga. Next slide, Kate. So Nicholas and Grace, so that's Mary's grandparents, married on the 10th of October 1737, but they got married at the King's Arms in Fleet Market. So if anybody knows about the history of fleet marriages, this is what is known as a clandestine marriage, without banns or licence. So that's been banned in churches from doing this in 1695, but the Fleet had some rather strange rules around it, particularly given the fact that it had a prison there as well. And that meant clergy within the rules of the Fleet were exempt from these rules of 1695. So it was a very quick and very cheap way of getting married. And there may have been pressing reasons for Mary's grandparents to get married, in that it's either Josh or Joseph Alex Belli, son of Nicholas, was buried on the 21st of January 1738 at St Botolph's in the city. So that looks like probably Mary's grandmother was pregnant at the time they got married at the Fleet. So it's almost a shotgun wedding, shall we say. Next slide. So Mary Frances Howley, or Mary Frances Belli as she's christened, has this rather strange background. Her great-great-grandparents had converted to Judaism in Portugal. Her great-grandparents were Jewish converts. Her grandmother may have attempted or may have converted back to Catholicism. She gets her son christened at the Portuguese embassy, so definitely Catholic. But her second husband, after Nicholas Belli died, was Protestant. So there's this lot of flip-flopping between which religion you are here. Unclear what her father was. He was probably baptised the Catholic, John Belli. But eventually, this woman ends up married to the Archbishop of Canterbury. So it's all quite interesting as to how this is going on. But there is clear Portuguese heritage here within the Belli side of the family. It's not clear what her paternal grandfather's origins were, but it is possible that he may have been Huguenot actually as well. So quite a mix. So next slide, Kate. So John Belli, so that's Mary's father. Tracing him has been interesting as well, and strangely I got an individual phone me up who's actually tracing the family, so we had a good conversation about this. But John Belli seems to join the Navy. In 1767 he's fifth mate on the Glatton, and he came back from China on the 9th of July that year. The Glatton was an East India Company ship, which was built in Deptford with the captain Richard Doveton of St Helena. So there's these kind of weird links again between the East India Company and Helena as well. So 1769 he's on the Bridgewater, which was a ship again built in Deptford for the East India Company. And the captain was a man named Nicholas Scotto. Belli travelled to Madras on that. He arrived on the 30th of June 1770. Scotto, who was the captain's brother, was the governor of St Helena. So we're getting these weird links again. And Nicholas actually ran the last slave transport for the East India Company, the Royal George, in 1764-6, from Cabinda in Angola to St Helena and then Bengkulu in Indonesia. This is kind of an interesting photo at the bottom, or a painting at the bottom of the Bridgewater, which was battling an American privateer at Hampton in 1779. It's actually one of the first images of the Stars and Stripes, so it's quite interesting in its own way. But yes, John Joseph Belli, who's Mary's father, Again, difficult to trace his early years, but he was made private secretary to Warren Hastings, who became the Governor General of Bengal at some point between 1772 and 1774. So Belli had served with Hastings previously in Madras as well, so there's a connection between these two. It seems that Belli may have been involved in finances as well. Belli and Fonerot was a financial house in Leghorn, which is now Livorno in Italy. Also agents of George Colebrook, who was chairman of the East India Company. So Belli's in India, and Sir John Macpherson referred to him as his protege, which is strange, as actually Belli was 5 years older than Macpherson. But Macpherson had arrived in Madras in 1767, returned in 1770. There's a record in 1774 of Belli taking a loan from Hastings, and by 1782 Belli's in Lucknow. And this is quite a famous painting, yeah. So, and this was supposedly commissioned by John Belli for Warren Hastings, which shows a cockfight between Colonel Mordaunt and the Nawab Asaf ud-Daula taking part. It's between 1784 to 6. So Belli actually paid for this for Warren Hastings. So Belli is interesting at this point in that he marries a woman named Elizabeth Stuart Glover at the India Office of Ecclesiastical Returns in the Bengal Presidency on the 20th of November 1781. By 1784 he seems to be back in England, as all of his subsequent children after Mary are born in Southampton or Bath. By 1786 fire insurance policies record him as insuring a property in Southampton. So he's obviously taken his money out of India and gone back to England. But the Times records on the 19th of March 1793 that Belli was returning to his rank in the East India Company Civil Service in Bengal after an absence of above 5 years. So Belli in 1797 is described as an assay master, and he may have been one in 1779 as well. So these are individuals who worked in the East India Company mints, and they verified the purity and weight of coins. But the most significant thing with John Belli is that in 1777, Warren Hastings appointed him as the agent for supplying the garrison of Fort William in Calcutta with victualling stores. So Belli got a commission of 30% on all stores, and in 1779 this was made a 5-year contract. So he drew a commission of £22,000 and a supply of £37,000 worth, nearly £5 million today. So this really is the East India Company taking the money out of India, as it were, and Belli was heavily involved in this. In 1785, Hastings is impeached, although he's found not guilty, and one of the key points in this is the sort of issue with Belli and the fact that he gave him this ridiculous contract. So it's sort of backhanders and all the rest of it that's going on. So we really are looking at the Cockrell family here. So John Belli's wife, who he adored, as we saw, she was called Glover, but that was because she'd married an individual named Brian Glover in 1779, but he passed away the following year, so her maiden name is actually Cockrell. So her brother Charles Cockrell had become a writer in the civil service of the East India Company at the age of 21, and her older brother John served in the company's army, and he was an intimate friend of Warren Hastings as well from 1776. So this Cockrell family are very heavily involved with Warren Hastings, as is John Belli. So you can see these kind of links all coming together. This is a really interesting painting that's just come up. The chap that I was talking to had found this in a house and mentioned it. So this shows John Belli on the left and Charles Cockrell on the right. They clearly had a very close relationship. Obviously, they're brothers-in-law. But this painting was recently discovered and was sold to Dalesford House, which is the former home of Warren Hastings, and very, very close, I think, to Sezincote. Yeah, there's all these kind of links again. So Charles Cockrell, in 1784, he's made Postmaster General of India and continued in that position to 1792. He lost his first wife, Maria Tryphena Blunt, but he's also friendly with Governor General Wellesley in India, and he became a banker for his family members. He sets up his own agency, Paxton, Cockrell and Trail, and they're involved in the trade in indigo. And he returns to England in 1801. He's made director of Globe Insurance in 1811 and a leading figure in the Gas, Light and Coke Company. In 1809, he's made a baronet after he married his second wife, Harriet Rushout, who's the daughter of the Baron of Northwick. So what he's doing here, you're seeing a lot of these, what they called nabobs at the time, making their money in India, but they're kind of seen as sort of nouveau riche coming back to the UK or back to England. And he's kind of getting rid of this a little bit by investing in very sort of British institutions and becoming a baronet. So he's trying to wash off this kind of past, as it were. But Sezincote House was actually originally bought by Colonel John Cockerell, so that's Charles's brother, just prior to his retirement from the East India Company in 1795. He'd gone to India aged 14 in 1763. And again, this is Sezincote's close to Daylesford, the home of Warren Hastings. So John Cockerell was kind of interesting in that he had this Indo-Portuguese mistress who was named Estuarta Johnson. She settled in Brighton with their children, but she did not live at Sezincote. And he did not provide for her in his will either. He died in 1798. He left 80,000 rupees, though, to be shared between his children, Sophia, John, Charles and Samuel. So he's got 4 children with Estuarta, who don't seem to have played much part in his life, really, other than being dragged over to live in Brighton. Next slide. Probably one of the most interesting links here, though, is that John Cockerell's daughter, Sophia, actually returned to India from Brighton. She married a Christian Indo-Portuguese office worker named Francis de Rosio. Their son Henry is born in Kolkata on the 18th of April 1809, and he goes on to become heavily involved in the Young Bengal movement, and he's seen as the first national poet of modern India. So it's a very strange kind of link here. And sadly, he died very young. He died of cholera on the 26th of December 1831, but he's obviously quite well thought of in India, as they issued a stamp with him on in 2009. So you've got this really, really quite strange links of kind of East India Company, this man's mistress having these children, and one of them goes back to India, and her son becomes this kind of really recognised Indian poet who was very sort of nationalist and very anti-East India Company, as it were. Next slide, Kate. So the link really between Fulham Palace and Sezincote, other than the sort of Cockerell families that we're seeing there as well, is again architecture. So when John dies, he leaves most of his estate not to his children or his mistress, but to Charles, Samuel and Elizabeth, who are his siblings. So that's Mary Frances Hooley's mother. Estuarta remained under the guardianship of the family, and apparently she often stayed with the Bellis in Southampton. So there is a sort of family link that continued on. But Sezincote was a country manor. And John had initially employed his brother, Samuel Pepys Cockerell, who was an architect, to redevelop it for him. But Samuel Pepys Cockerell had trained under Sir Robert Taylor, architect surveyor to the East India House in Whitehall, and he designed Daylesford for Hastings as well. So between 1788 and 93, and at Daylesford, he incorporated this sort of Indian motif. So again, you've got these people coming back from India, building their new houses back in England and sort of bringing parts of India back with them, as it were. So Charles Cockerell was awarded compensation, interestingly, for several estates on Mauritius in 1837, and then that was obviously the end of slavery. But then they used indentured labourers from India. Charles Rushout Cockerell, the same as well, he was also compensated, and John Cockerell as well, their nephew. And Mauritius was actually only taken over by the British in 1810, so it's very recent that they'd been using it in this manner. But Samuel Pepys, the son of Samuel Pepys Cockerell, who is also compensated for 10 plantations in Jamaica. So the Cockerell family are clearly heavily involved in using slave labour, as it were. So interestingly, Mauritius is actually the last British colony to end slavery, and indentured servitude continued there until 1918, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. Next slide, Kate. So, as I said, Charles Cockerell, John's died, his brother. Charles Cockerell then buys the shares of the rest of Sezincote from his siblings. So he pays £38,000 to them, 1801. Originally, the Cockerells aren't from a hugely wealthy background. So as I've said up there, nabobs were described as upstarts with vast, easily won fortunes. So actually, the Cockerells were children of John Cockerell and Frances Jackson. And they lived near Taunton in Somerset. So John was lord of, Huntsville and Puritan Manors, but he'd gone bankrupt by 1765, and he was sent to the King's Bench prison. And he assigned the manor to John Pearce, one of his creditors. So he'd lost everything, and bizarrely died in Antigua in 1767. I can't quite understand what he's doing out there. But you can see why the younger Cockerells may have been attracted to India as a place to make a vast, easily won fortune. So Sezincote, as we say, unlike John Cockerell, Charles, when he bought it, he wanted Sezincote to look flamboyant and to reflect on his time in India. Now this is sort of, generally speaking, the opposite of what a lot of nabobs did, in that Sezincote was Indian on the outside, but more English on the inside. Most nabobs sort of had an English manner, and then everything inside it was kind of Indian. So he began work on changing Sezincote into what it is now, with his brother, Samuel Pepys Cockerell, the architect, in 1805. And it continued way into the 1820s. And in fact, Samuel Pepys Cockerell became unwell, and his son Charles ended up finishing it. So he went into the architecture trade as well. So we know that here, Bishop Howley made lots of changes at the palace. We know that his wife, Mary Frances Belli, is from a wealthy background on both sides. Both her father, who's working for the East India Company in India, and his links to Warren Hastings, and her mother, who's a Cockerell, who are also making lots of money in India as well. So all of this wealth comes via the East India Company. So the architect, of course, that the Howleys employed was Mary Frances' uncle, Samuel Pepys Cockerell. So Fulham Palace has the same architect as Sezincote. Yeah. So trying to work out where Howley's money came from, though, has been really difficult. So, you know, there is an assumption that perhaps it came from his wife's wealth, which had obviously been gained through the East India Company. So this is a strange thing that happens, and this is research at Lambeth Palace Library. 29th of March 1814 says they will pay £1,800. So this is to do with Queen Anne's bounty. So at the time, sort of high-up bishops who get good wages are supposed to give a tenth of their money and their first fruits of their years in their positions towards lesser serving reverends and vicars who are quite poor and in sort of poorer neighbourhoods or whatever. So that's towards helping, the poorer clergy. So the first fruits, you pay 1/4 of the sum annually. First fruits of the first year's profits, £900 for Howley, so £225 a year. A tenth of the annual profit or tithe. So you can't see, if those are what he's paying, where does the £20,000 come from? It's certainly not reflected in his wages, as it were. So if first year's profits are £900, that does not amount to £20,000 for a building project. So there were huge changes to the palace which were made. New floors were constructed, the Tudor courtyards rearranged internally. We had Gothic Lodge, which is the pink house you may have seen on the way in, built. He spends a lot of money here and makes absolutely huge changes. So people seem to have been drawn to the East India Company as a way to make fast money. So that was certainly the case with the Cockerells and probably with John Belli as well. So the younger sons of the landed gentry, who don't get to inherit the land, Scots who'd lost their property in the Jacobite uprising, soldiers who saw an opportunity in a private army. The East India Company had its own army that was actually larger than the English army. And clergymen's sons as well. It's a dangerous place to go, though, with 2/3 of company servants never returning. So you could make lots of money, but you could die. So 1788, Warren Hastings is impeached, with Edmund Burke prosecuting, who said that every rupee of profit made by an Englishman is lost to India forever. The East India Company appears more like an army going to pillage the people under the pretense of commerce than anything else. So Hastings himself was certainly no angel. Under him, the East India Company was very extractive. He did bully and strong-arm local rulers for finances, but compared to a lot of other East India Company officials, he was more sympathetic to the indigenous population. He railed against those who plundered, wrecked and mistreated, and he also built the Gola or granary at Patna, to reduce the famine risk, because there's been this horrendous famine, obviously in India, and he was relatively popular. So the impeachment was a complete failure, but what it did highlight, the prosecution, was the British ignorance about the subcontinent they had been looting for absolutely decades. So in conclusion, the legacy of Howley's finances is confusing, but it certainly suggests that the bishop did not personally have the financial means for his building projects that he undertook here. So the likelihood is that some of the money that was put into Fulham Palace came from the Belli and Cockerell coffers. So if you've read William Dalrymple's book, then the last sort of thing I'm going to say is that the East India Company remains today's most ominous warning about the potential for the abuse of corporate power and the insidious means by which the interests of shareholders can seemingly become those of the state. Okay, thank you very much.